We got one more guest here for this Monday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is professional handicapper Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
Doing all right, man. Bowl season's here.
Yes, sir. Bowl season is here. We're going to talk about a lot of things to help you out here with the bowl season. We're going to do some general stuff first, and then we'll take a look at the 5 bowl games coming up on Saturday, and then we'll look at the college basketball side of things here for a little bit to wrap up today's show. But, Kyle, I think something that's really important, and we talked about this a little bit last week from a power rating standpoint, is that, I have some outliers. I have some games where I've got some overlays because we go from teams playing conference foes all the time to now stepping outside the conference. And there are some conferences here in college football bowl season that just don't do particularly well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that trends, angles, systems, things like that make a lot of sense this time of the year. Listen, paying attention to how conferences have done in the past, I know that some people think that, it's a narrative from the media. Certainly, the straight up record of how a conference does is a narrative that the media likes to run every year. But, ATS records by conference, I think, matter quite a bit because it shows you, first of all, which conferences play up well in bowl season and which don't. And that has a lot to do with the strength or weakness of that conference. It's certainly something you want to keep in mind.
Well, and I think something that's important, too, is, you talk about ATS records as opposed to straight-up records. Think about it. The SEC is going to be favored more often than not. Whether they're playing the Big Ten or playing in the college football playoff or whatever the case may be, they're going to be favored in a lot of those games. So the fact that the SEC has done very well in bowl games, and according to your notes here, 65-41 and 1, or 65-46 and 1 ATS over the last 10 years, a lot of those are in favorite roles. So when they're supposed to win and cover, they're doing it. The opposite is true of the MAC, where a lot of times MAC teams are going to be underdogs. We have seen, Toledo, Western Michigan, Ohio, some of those teams be in a favorite role. But a lot of times MAC teams are underdogs, 20, 34, and 3 against the spread the last 10 years. So I think that paints a really good picture. And I know that specifically here you want to touch on the Big 12 and the Pac-12, where, those are two teams that at least recently have had some difficulties.
Yeah, well, the Pac-12's 2-13 ATS in their last 15 bowl games. If you look at the last 10 years, the Pac-12 is a little bit underwater, but nothing very bad at all. But if you look at the last couple of years, the Pac-12 is very weak. I think that makes sense because Pac-12 has certainly gotten worse as a conference here in the last few years, and I think everybody knows that. But it shows that it shows up pretty clearly in bowl season. I think it is more interesting that the Big 12 is 34 and 48 ATS in the last 10 years of bowl games. I view the Big 12 to be a pretty competitive conference. Maybe not as many top teams that are really strong, but there's not too many really bad teams. I mean, obviously you've got Kansas in there that's been really bad. The middle of the conference seems to be a decent conference to me, the Big 12, but 34 and 48 ATS, so the Big 12 has been a money burner as well.
Yeah, and I think part of that has to do with one of the systems that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, so we'll circle back to the Big 12 at that point. But you found a few systems here, some trends, but they are some – I'm not a big trends guy. Everyone knows that, and I don't use them at all with a sport like baseball, something like that. But when there's a significant enough sample size or an angle that makes a lot of sense, they are things that I certainly want to incorporate into my thought process, into my handicapping process for the bowl games. So I think the 3 that you've isolated here that we're going to talk about in today's show do have significant sample sizes and are important for a variety of different reasons.
Yeah, and I'll just say that, these bowl systems, trends, statistics, whatever you want to call it, these types of angles are definitely part of the reason I've done well in the long term in bowl season. I think bowl season is something where, you can find past things that are likely predictive in the future. These are large sample size things or things that would make sense if you think through, why is that happening? I think that these will continue to work in the long run. Obviously, in any given year, as I tell my clients, and as would be true with these, you don't know how you're going to do in any one given bowl season. I've done well in bowl season. It's a strong area for me. I don't know how I'll do this year, but, in the past I've done well. And the same thing would be true about these systems. I'm not sure exactly how they'll do in 1 year, but I am confident that they'll do well in the long run. First one I wanted to point out here, I just put in my notes here, bowl been there before angle. So you're looking at a team with 8 wins or more the previous season who also was in a bowl game that year. If they're either laying 3 points or less or are the underdog, they are 97-59 with 1+, 62.2% ATS since 2011. This is a large sample size, and I think this will be a good angle in the long run. And when they're facing a team who didn't go to the postseason the year before, 24-9 ATS. So I think this makes sense because you've got a team who was very good last year, at least was a good team. 8 wins or more, you had a solid season. And then you're not laying a big number. They're either the underdog or laying 3 points or less, 97-59. Certainly a strong angle there.
Yeah, I think that there are a handful of reasons why this angle has been so profitable. I think one of them is that, if you were a team that played well last year and made it to a bowl game, there are a few different ways to look at this. One, I think you're probably on the rise. Maybe, especially with all the coaching turnover that we have in college football, maybe you're a team that, got to that 8-win plateau last year, got to a bowl game, had those extra practices. You've got a younger or a newer head coach kind of incorporating some more recruits and some new things into the scheme, stuff like that. So I would expect that you would do well in the bowl season the following year. Another thing is that if you're laying 3 points or less, or even getting points, the likelihood is that you probably underachieved. And if you're an underachiever, people don't want to bet on you. And this will kind of sprinkle into another angle we're going to talk about here shortly. But if you underachieved, you're kind of pissed off about it. You want to end your season on a high note. That's going to be winning that bowl game. That's going to be, giving yourself something positive at the end of the season to kind of hang your hat on and say, you know what, we went to a bowl last year. We played pretty well. This year we didn't do so well. Let's finish strong. And a lot of teams do kind of respond to that because this is the last chance that some of these guys have to take the field. So I think this sample size is significant. Looking at a sample of, nearly 160 games here, I do think this is something that will continue to move forward. And again, facing a team that didn't go to the postseason last year, that is a team that still has to learn about this bowl process. And it is a little bit different to stay focused through finals and 2 weeks of practice and all that. If you're a team that's done it already, it makes sense you'd be more comfortable in that environment.
Certainly, I think this is the point that you brought up about a team that's kind of underachieved is a very good point. It's something that, if you just look at bowl teams in general and you take a team that hasn't covered very well throughout the course of the season, you're going to be doing pretty well because you have good teams who haven't quite played up to expectations of the odds makers. And then bettors in their mind are saying, this team hasn't been that good. I don't really want to bet them. And that kind of trickles into another thought as well as far as fitting the public as we go forward. But the underachievers have certainly done very well in bowl season in the past, and I would expect that to continue. The next one, low ATS and a better defense. This is a really simple system. You've covered 47% or less ATS on the season thus far. You've allowed 4.90 yards per play or less. Your opponent has allowed 4.91 yards per play or more. So you've got the better defense. You've got a good defense. The opposition has a worse defense. And you've covered 47% or less ATS, 40 and 16 ATS since 2005. To be honest with you, I really think this is a good angle. I think that you can actually play with these numbers as well. I looked at this a little bit last night. It doesn't have to be 4.90 yards per play or less, or 4.91 yards per play or more. I wanted this to be a tight system to where we had 40 and 16 ATS. But essentially, if you take the better defense, they haven't covered very well ATS-wise for the season. You do well in bowl season. So you could say, allowed 5.2 yards per play or less, and the other team 5.21 or more. It's going to be a good angle there as well. So low ATS, better defense, a strong strong system.
Well, and this could be an angle that you definitely want to look at here this bowl season, because there were 24 defenses that allowed 4.9 or fewer yards per play here on the year. 22 of them, are in a bowl game. Wyoming is not, and Southern Miss is not. So you've got 22 of the 24 teams that allowed 4.9 yards per play or fewer in bowl games. So this is an angle you definitely want to go and check out here. I mean, we're talking about teams, I don't know what the ATS cover percentages are, but the teams that were 4.9 or below, you're talking about Clemson, Mississippi State, Miami, App State, Michigan, Temple, Alabama, Notre Dame, Iowa, Cincinnati, Northern Illinois, who's a very interesting team because they play great defense and have no offense whatsoever, Washington, Michigan State, Utah, Cal, Penn State, Marshall, Fresno, BYU, LSU, UAB, and TCU. 25th on that list, 4.94 yards per play, Eastern Michigan. So they just fall outside of that, of that betting system there, of that angle. We'll talk about the Eagles here in a little bit. But again, 22 of the 24 teams that fit this, possible system are in bowl games this year. So double check, see how they did against the spread. Maybe you'll find some good angles there.
Yeah, there's several of them that will fit that system this year. And another thing I would say is that when you look at these, there are also some of these teams that would fit multiple of these systems, and that's one that I would consider more strongly than the others, because you get multiple strong systems that all fit the same team. It's certainly something you want to look at. The last one I wanted to say is fading the public. Fading the public in bowl season has been a really good angle. How good? So we're talking taking teams receiving 48% of bets or less. Since 2012, you would have gone 121 and 91 ATS. That's 57.1% ATS in a large sample size. Take it a step farther, teams receiving 41% of the bets or less since 2012, 79 and 51 ATS, and that's 60.85% ATS. I wanted to say that it's important to note when you think about this, this does require some guesswork as to who the public will take if you're betting these early at all, because these numbers are from tickets bet as of the kickoff. So this is not, 2 weeks before the game. It wouldn't necessarily match what it's going to look like as the kickoff happens. So you're going to have to try to decide who you think the public is going to back, or you're going to have to bet it close to the kickoff. That's the way that you would look at a system like this.
And keep in mind, too, with the bowl games, these odds have been out for a long time, but only, influential guys, sharp guys, maybe some of the pseudo-sharp guys that Brent likes to talk about, those are the only people betting into these numbers right now. A lot of public players will not touch these games until the day of the game or maybe a couple days before the game if there's not a whole lot going on. So we will see a lot more public investment in these as we get closer to kickoff. So you will kind of have to, as Kyle said there, guess a little bit maybe, or at least have a good feeling for where the public has come in on some of these teams. But this also circles back to that been there before angle about a team that underachieved, because you're going to have teams here in the bowl season where, what do people remember? Well, they got their asses kicked in their last regular season game. Maybe a team like Duke, for example, falls into this, where Duke got destroyed by Wake Forest in the last game. Maybe the public side winds up being Temple, with people not realizing that Temple just let Jeff Collins go to Georgia Tech, and now they have an interim head coach for the bowl. So maybe the public backs Temple, but Duke probably the side here at this point with a big coaching edge to David Cutcliffe. So, maybe that's a game that kind of falls into this mold. But I think there's a lot of overlap between these systems, like Kyle said, that teams that underachieved are teams that the public doesn't want to play on here at this time of the year. I think, even a game on a much larger scale here, like the Fiesta Bowl between LSU and Central Florida, right now LSU is the preferred side when you look at the consensus percentages and stuff like that. But LSU is kind of a forgotten afterthought because they're not the same team in the SEC West. It wouldn't surprise me if UCF was the public team there, even without Mackenzie Milton. Who do you want to take in that spot? You're left with some of these decisions in the bowl season, but, like we said there, going against what the popular perception is probably the way to go.
Yeah, definitely. And if you just want to say a couple other games where you can pretty much tell who the public's going to take, the public's going to take Georgia against Texas. We know that. They remember just seeing Georgia almost beating Alabama, a very good showing from Georgia. They're going to take Georgia in that game, so that's one where you'd feel comfortable knowing who the public is going to take. Another one, Mississippi State is going to take the money against Iowa. I mean, they already have, and I think the public will take Mississippi State as well, based on the Mississippi State played well in the SEC, and Iowa had a disappointing season, or at least compared to what some people thought they'd be in the Big Ten West, not a very good division. So those are a couple games that I think it's pretty easy to see who the public is going to take. Some of the others, obviously, it's going to be hard to know ahead of time, but you can, if you want to bet these later in the week or later as it gets closer to the game, it certainly would make sense if you're looking at that angle. And like Adam said, these systems, there's going to be a lot of overlap there. The bowl been there before and bidding the public, there's a ton of overlap. And if you can find ones that have the better defense and haven't done very well ATS that also match the other ones, I think that's a pretty strong look.
Yeah, I think a couple of other games where it looks like we're going to have some one-sided public stuff. I mean, I already took Ohio State. I think it's very hard to go against the motivational angles for the Buckeyes with Urban Meyer retiring. But that's going to be a very one-sided ticket count there in the Rose Bowl. So maybe Washington winds up being a good play there. Also, Oregon is a very popular team for the Red Box Bowl against Michigan State because Michigan State is one of those teams that kind of fits that early, been there before angle because they go to a bowl game annually. Mark D'Antonio is a very, very good head coach, and they had a terrible year. And they're not getting any love here against Oregon. It's tough to take Michigan State. I will certainly agree with that. But if that line gets to 3.5 or maybe 4, I may wind up forcing myself into a Michigan State ticket for some of these reasons that we're talking about here.
Yeah, Michigan State's going to match several of these systems. Michigan State's team has been there before. They have a good defense, certainly the better defense. And they also play in the stronger conference. So Michigan State's one that I will certainly consider playing myself. I couldn't take Oregon in a game like that. And sometimes you do have to take ones that are not very easy to take for it to match up with these systems or for it to just be a good value play. I mean, sometimes you take a side and say, man, this is a hard side to take, but those can be some really good sides to take in bowl season. So I think that was a good example there.
We'll talk about these bowl games some more here with our variety of guests as we go forward, but I do want to take a look at Saturday's bowl games. It's also a pretty weak slate in college basketball this week, so we will do some college hoops, but spending the majority of our segment here today on college football. Even though it's not chronological, we'll start with the first game by rotation number. That is the New Mexico Bowl. North Texas takes on Utah State. Utah State favored by 9. We've started to see a little bit of North Texas investment here with Matt Wells taking the job at Texas Tech and people kind of coming around to this game now that limits have increased because it's only, 5 days away, whatever it is. So you've got Utah State here, interim head coach, North Texas, pretty decent team. Seth Luttrell still there for now. We'll see if anything happens here leading up to this game. But what do you think about this one, Kyle?
Well, first of all, with Utah State not having their head coach that they've had for several years in a row, certainly a big question mark. You look at a Utah State team that's certainly been the better of these two teams throughout the course of the season. I think they deserve to be the favorite. Jordan Love's the key to this offense. He's had a very good season. In a couple of their losses, though, he didn't play very well. And in a couple of their close calls, say against Wyoming, against Colorado State, he didn't play very well. So really, Jordan Love is a big key to the offense. And obviously it's easy to say the quarterback's the key to the offense. I think that's even more the case with Utah State than most teams. Utah State's a lot better on special teams than North Texas. I think that's something we shouldn't overlook. And North Texas has played a really weak schedule, one of the weakest schedules of anybody in the bowl season. If you look at Sagarin, they're 139th in strength of schedule. What that means is there's FCS teams that Sagarin believes have played a tougher schedule than North Texas. So that would tell you a lot about their strength of schedule. Mason Fine's been a little bit banged up. Need him to be healthy for this game. He's not listed on the injury report that I see here. I do know that he has been banged up, so you want him to be 100% healthy. Utah State's really strong on the front seven on defense. I think their question mark on defense is the secondary. And if you look at their stats for Utah State's defense, you'd say, well, their secondaries, their stats look great. They've defended the pass well. They have not played against very many good teams throwing the football or really good quarterbacks. And you look down their schedule, Utah State, which really good quarterbacks have they played against? It's really hard to come up with them. So I think that North Texas should be able to move the ball on Utah State. We've got a high total here. If I had to take the total, I'd probably take the over. My lean here is to North Texas as well based on the situation. I think Utah State is in a tough spot playing without a guy that has led their program for a long time. We need Mason Fine to be healthy, and you have to be okay with the fact that North Texas hasn't played a good schedule. Conference USA has been a conference that's done pretty well in bowl season in the past, so we'll see if that continues this year. But my lean here has to be toward North Texas. I can't lay points with Utah State given the situation here. So I think my strongest lean for this game is North Texas plus the points.
Power rating number on this game is 9.5, but I gave Utah State a 1.5 for home field advantage because they're accustomed to playing in the altitude. Albuquerque is a little bit of altitude. And also, they play in Albuquerque every other year when they play against New Mexico, one of their division opponents. So in that respect, and this is always an interesting thing about bowl season, I don't think that it's necessarily an issue for a team like Utah State. I think they're happy to get to one. I think they won 11 wins. They were ranked earlier on in the year, so they want to finish things off and really see that through. But they are playing in a spot they play in every other year. And one of the most appealing things about the bowl season is going and seeing something different. And that's not the case for Utah State here. So maybe I overvalued what it's worth to be playing in a familiar setting. But I think the altitude factor here is what's concerning for me for North Texas. So I don't think I would play the full game here. Maybe North Texas in the half because they should have the coaching advantage. But I'd be a little bit worried about them in the second half as fatigue sets in. Because keep in mind here, too, a lot of these teams won't have played for 3 or 4 weeks. And you're practicing and you're conditioning and you're lifting and all that. But as we all know, a game situation is just much different.
Absolutely. I think that Utah State is a team that's hard to lay points with based on all the situations going on here. They are the better team. The thing is, in bowl season, as we've talked about before, the better team doesn't always win, and they certainly don't always cover. I think North Texas will be motivated for this game. I imagine Utah State wants to win this game. I don't know that their motivation level would be quite as high. They played in this bowl game 3 or 4 years ago. And, this is a Utah State team that has to be disappointed they lost Matt Wells. And, to me, North Texas, a motivated team getting that many points. I can't say that I love this game because I don't know how North Texas will play up based on they've played a really weak schedule. But, if I had to take something here, I'd take North Texas. And I will say the Sharps certainly like the over because this one's from 64.5 to 66.5 already.
All right, so let's go to the Cure Bowl here. This is in Orlando, Florida, same place where the Camping World Bowl will be, between Tulane and Louisiana. Of course, everyone knows them as Louisiana Lafayette. They mostly just go by Louisiana now, but everybody calls them Lafayette. So whatever you want to call them here, 6th bowl appearance in program history for the Ragin' Cajuns, the first time they will not be playing in the New Orleans Bowl. So they get to see something different. They'll go to Disney World and do all the fun things you can do in Orlando. Oddly enough, they're playing a team from New Orleans in the Cure Bowl in the Tulane Green Wave. So you've got Tulane right now, 3.5-point favorite. Total on this game's kind of moved around, or it really hasn't moved around too much at all, I should say, sitting there at 59. What do you think about the Cure Bowl?
I like this game a little bit better than the one before it. To be honest with you, when I saw who was matched up here, I assumed this was the New Orleans Bowl in the Superdome. It would have made a lot of sense, but it's not the case. It's 2 teams from Louisiana. You've got a Tulane team who has been much better stopping the run than has Louisiana Lafayette, and it's hard for me to drop the Lafayette. I've been so used to it for a long time. But Tulane certainly the better run defense. And I will say one other thing I want to point out is that if you look at this long-term as far as ATS numbers in bowl games, the good run defenses have done a lot better than the good pass defenses. I'm not exactly sure why that is. Adam, if you have a take on that, I'd like to hear it. I mean, to me, it's interesting that the really strong run defenses have done much better than the strong pass defenses, ATS. Would you have any input on why that might be?
I mean, I guess I would think about it in terms of physicality. You know, if you're a good run defense, you're probably a very physical type of team. And some teams, you know, we talk about Utah State, for example, in the schedule that they played. I mean, they literally, after losing to Michigan State to open the year, they didn't really play anybody until they played Boise State. And then they lost to Boise State. So I think the fact that you can't replicate that physicality in some instances, I think it's something where, you know, like I said, you haven't played in a few weeks. Maybe your timing's off with the pass game, so you're going to run the football a little bit more. And I think you just kind of, you know, maybe you get out-physicaled, out-muscled a little bit.
Yeah, I think the timing being off could be a good point as well, because you go a long ways between playing these games. And certainly we've seen in bowl season in the past, early in the games, that passing game, if you got a rhythm passing offense, can be a little bit off, where the run game should still be about what it has been in the past. So if you're able to stop the run, maybe that makes sense there. Circling back, you know, I think Tulane is the much better run defense, not even close between these two teams. Also, Tulane's played a much stronger schedule. Sagarin strength of schedule, Tulane 74th, Louisiana 112th. I have to lean towards Tulane in this game. I think this line may go down to 3 based on what I'm seeing here on the odds screen. I think there's a good chance you'll be able to get 3. You got Pinnacle at -3.5 plus 101 right now. Probably a good chance you get 3 at some point here if you like Tulane. So you probably want to try to wait that one out. You know, I often get asked, when do you want to fire on a game? When do you want to wait? When do you want to go ahead? You know, if you're near a really key number like 3, it makes a lot of sense to try to wait it out. You know, if you're sitting there on 5 and you like the game, it's probably not going to matter too much. But when you're at 3.5, you know, you got to take the chance of that one coming down to 3. For me also, I have to like the over in this game. This one's come down just a little bit at Chris right now. This is a game I'll consider myself. Tulane and Louisiana over the total. Listen, Louisiana has been really good on offense all year. You can look at their yards per play. You can look at their passing offense, their run offense. They've been really good. Certainly they haven't played too many good defenses in the Sun Belt. But you've got a Tulane offense that actually is pretty good with explosive plays. You know, in their run game, Tulane's able to break quite a few big runs. Louisiana's run defense is very weak. So I think Tulane's going to have a lot of success running the football here. The tempo is not very quick, and that's your concern if you take the over in a game like this. But I do think both teams will be able to move. I like Tulane here, and I like the over.
I think one thing that's really interesting about this game is that Willie Fritz fired his offensive coordinator in late November, hired one. It took about 8 days for them to fire a guy and hire a new guy, and that's Will Hall, who was the tight ends coach at Memphis. He becomes the offensive coordinator here for Tulane. Obviously, they're not going to change up too much, I wouldn't think, going into the bowl game. Maybe Tulane looks a little bit different next year. But last year, Will Hall, offensive coordinator, and did some work offensively for Louisiana Lafayette. So he has a little bit of knowledge of this offensive personnel for the Ragin' Cajuns. So, you know, we'll see if that gives Tulane a little bit of a bump here in the Cure Bowl. Let's go out to Las Vegas for the Mitsubishi Motors Las Vegas Bowl. Arizona State, Fresno State. This was 3.5, went to 4.5 when N'Keal Harry said, you know what, I'm just going to worry about the NFL draft. I'll see you all later. Fresno State, Jeff Tedford for now, still sticking around. Maybe he gets an NFL job. But that won't happen until after the NFL season. So Fresno State, a 4-point favorite here in this one. Total down a little bit from 52.5 to 51.5.
Yeah, it's interesting to see a Fresno State team that has clearly played a much weaker schedule, favored against a Arizona State team that's played the stronger schedule. You don't see that too often in bowl season. You know, listen, part of this is the Pac-12 is so bad. I think everybody knows the Pac-12 is bad at this point. And that's one thing I would say about just blindly fading the Pac-12 right now. You know, the public's going to be fading the Pac-12. So it's something to keep in mind as you look forward. I don't think the Pac-12 is a good conference, and I'm not anxious to back them, but, it's certainly something to keep in mind. I really like the job that Jeff Bedford's done. I mean, he's done a tremendous job. How can you not like Dunn here at Fresno State? I really can't believe how good their defense is at. When he was hired, it was like, okay, the offense is going to get a lot better. I didn't know the defense was going to get this much better. And even after losing a lot of key players from last year, their defense was very good again this year. I think we have to give Herm Edwards some credit for the work he did this year as well with Arizona State. A really unpopular hire. It seems like that the players really bought into what he was selling. He got the players to play hard for him. Deserves a lot of credit for that. I think that this is a game. I have no strong opinion whatsoever, so maybe Adam has a lean on this one. But, in the last game, I like Tulane, and I like the over. And this one, I'm almost sure I'm going to pass on this game. I think that this is one where it's hard to lay 4 points with Fresno State, knowing that Arizona State's played a tougher schedule, and Arizona State has a pretty good defense as well. Certainly, N'Keal Harry not being there is part of the reason for why the line is what it is. What he's worth for the point spread. A wide receiver can't be worth a ton, but he's worth something, and that's what the market's telling you as well. I think that this is a really spot on line at this point. I would probably lean to the under if I had to play the total, but I don't think at 52 or 51.5 that there's that much value there either.
I do like the under a little bit in this game because these are two teams that don't turn the football over. And that's really what gets you over the total in a lot of games. Unless it's one of those track meet shootout types of games, it's going to be short fields. It's going to be teams that turn the football over a lot, give it up in their own territory. These two teams do not turn the football over a whole lot at all. Fresno State turned it over 11 times. Arizona State was even fewer than that. I think they had 9 or something like that. Manny Wilkins only had 4 of them, 4 interceptions. So these two teams take care of the football really well. So I think the under maybe has a little bit of value in that regard. I do like Arizona State a little bit in this spot. The public is on Fresno State here so far, as you mentioned, looking to fade the Sun Devils. I just like what Arizona State is doing, and I kind of like this idea, and Herm Edwards has had a lot more success with it than Lovie Smith has, but he runs this like an NFL team. He is the figurehead, the guy in front of the media, the guy who makes, the big decisions, things of that sort. But he lets Rob Likens run the offense and lets Danny Gonzalez run the defense. And I like that. And I think that setup has really helped Arizona State a lot this year. And by the way, as good as N'Keal Harry is, and he's very, very good, probably a first-round pick in the NFL draft, probably an early first-round pick at that, Eno Benjamin, Arizona State's running back, 1,524 yards. I don't even think anybody knows that name. People know N'Keal Harry because he's on he's on ESPN, he's on SportsCenter, this and that. Arizona State has a really good running game. And I think you give a couple of talented coordinators a lot of time to prep here for a Fresno State team that is good but hasn't played much of a schedule. I actually like Arizona State a little bit in this spot. And I think something really interesting about this game, too, you talk about destination bowls. You talk about fan bases showing up. I got a pretty good idea that Arizona State, and the students want to celebrate the end of finals by going up to Vegas. It's only a 5-hour trip from Tempe. I think Fresno is fairly well represented, but I think there's a lot of Sun Devils fans up there too, to the point where maybe that gives Arizona State a little bit of a boost as well.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a good point. One other thing that I wanted to point out as I'm looking down through the stats for this game, Fresno State defense in the red zone this year, tremendous. Now, you could argue this either way, and I'd be curious to get your take on this as well. They've had 24 trips into the red zone their opponents have had. 15 times those teams have scored, only 62.5%. That's the least anybody scored on opposing defense. So Fresno State's red zone defense has been better than anybody else in the country, and only 10 times out of those 24 have teams scored a touchdown. Certainly you have to give them credit for being the bend but don't break defense. I mean, they've been a good defense in general, but certainly once you get them into the red zone or the opposing team gets into the red zone, they've really struggled. I do have to say, I really feel like that's a type of regression statistic. I mean, it obviously didn't hit him throughout the course of the season, but you wouldn't be shocked to see it hit him here. I mean, only 10 touchdowns in 24 trips is very hard to do.
It is, and it circles back to the point we talked about with Utah State in terms of their schedule and in terms of, stepping up, playing a quarterback like Mason Fine. The Mountain West was not a good offensive conference at all this year. Nevada ran an air raid, but it's not like they lit up the scoreboard. When Fresno State played Nevada, Ty Ganji didn't play. So that was a spot where Fresno State could have been tested, but they weren't. They played Boise twice. San Diego State's got a bad offense. Hawaii's got a decent offense out there in the West and, scored 20 points on Fresno. But, it was a bad conference offensively in the Mountain West. Colorado State, big step back. Wyoming didn't do much offensively. Air Force, they're that triple option type of team. I think it's just one of those things where you have to look for regression out of these Mountain West defenses when they're going outside the conference, because the conference was terrible offensively.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that, this is a conference that in the past we've had some really good offenses. This year that was not the case, so I think that's a strong point.
All right, let's go to the Camellia Bowl here. Eastern Michigan takes on Georgia Southern. You wrote about this when you previewed the Raycom Media Camellia Bowl over at BangTheBook.com for us. Down in Montgomery, Georgia Southern, Eastern Michigan. Obviously, Georgia Southern running that option, so we'll see if Eastern Michigan, can get prepped for it, can be focused to defend it. What do you think about this one here with Georgia Southern, a 1-point favorite and a total of 47.5?
Well, I mean, as you said, my thoughts in depth are at BangTheBook.com, so if anybody's interested, you can check that one out. I think that Georgia Southern has to get some home field advantage here. I'm going to give them 2 points. I think that, they're so much closer to home. Eastern Michigan, a pretty long road trip where a MAC team is not used to traveling very far at all. You think of where the MAC schools are located, they're very close together compared to many of the other conferences. So you got to give Georgia Southern some home field advantage in this game. The other thing that I think is important about this game, Georgia Southern is going to run the ball consistently over and over again. They've gotten back to what they're good at this year, and I think that you have to give Coach Lunsford credit for that. They got away from that under Tyson Summers, and that did not work. And Shai Werts has done a good job running this offense. I don't think he's thrown an interception all year, if I remember correctly. So, this is a Georgia Southern offense that is all about the run. They can throw in the pass once in a while and surprise you, as any other triple option team could. They're very good in the red zone. And honestly, the triple option teams do very well in the red zone because they're used to running the ball. If you're throwing it around and then you get in the red zone and there's not near as much space to work with, you have a harder time. I think this is a Georgia Southern team that if I had to back a side, I would take Georgia Southern here. The MAC has not done well ATS in bowl games in the past. I think I like the under a little bit better, though, because Georgia Southern is going to run the ball over and over again. They're using up 33 seconds between plays, meaning that clock is getting low every single time that they snap it. And with them running, there's going to be a lot of running clock here. Eastern Michigan's defense got a lot better throughout the course of the season. You have 2 pretty good defenses here. Georgia Southern's offense is a pretty good offense. Eastern Michigan, my concern with them would be their strength is in the secondary on defense. Very good against the pass. Against the run, decent. Not terrible, not really that good, somewhere in the middle of the pack. They're not going to be able to show off the fact that their secondary is really good in this game. That doesn't matter very much. So that would be what makes me lean toward Georgia Southern. The fact that the Eagles, Georgia Southern, will be using the clock up so much and running the ball is what makes me like the under.
Yeah, I made the joke, and you made the joke in your write-up. The Eagles are guaranteed to win this game. So at least there's that. That's the all-time gambling lock of the century, that the Eagles will win this game. But the one thing I think here, and I like Eastern Michigan a little bit. I don't know if I like it enough to have some action on the game. But Eastern Michigan did play Army earlier in the year. Now, the optics aren't great. They lost 37-22. But Eastern Michigan only had the ball for 14 minutes and 18 seconds in this game, had 22 points in the second half. So there's that. And they held Army to 4 yards per carry. Army had 73 rushing attempts in that game. for 289 yards. Only 4 yards per carry. They had the ball for 45, 42, 10 of 19 on third down, 4 for 4 on fourth down. So Army just didn't get off the field. Now you could say Eastern Michigan couldn't get off the field, which is certainly understandable, but they prepped for an option already this year, and they didn't do that bad against it on a yards per carry perspective, while only allowing 4. So I think Eastern Michigan is, fairly well prepped for the Georgia Southern option, but also, too, I think when you look at the option teams here in these bowl games, they're going to do what they're going to do, and they're going to want to run the football. But it also wouldn't surprise me if they open the playbook up a little bit more, particularly early on in the game, trying to throw some of those passes, soften up the defense, stuff like that. Whether that helps or hurts Eastern Michigan, I'm not sure. But at least I think they're going to be pretty prepped for the option.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that they really did a solid job against that Army triple option. 4.0 yards per carry, certainly not what Army had as an average throughout the course of the season. So Eastern Michigan held their own there, and I think that's a fair point.
All right, let's go to the New Orleans Bowl here. Middle Tennessee and Appalachian State, probably my favorite bowl game coming up here on the 15th. I would like it a little bit more if Scott Satterfield hadn't gotten the job at Louisville. So Appalachian State going with an interim head coach here. I believe his name is Matt Ivy. And I have an article, or Mark Ivy. Over at BangTheBook.com, I have an article about interim head coaches and how they've done in the bowl games dating back to 03-04. What's so interesting about this game to me is you've got Brent Stockstill playing his last game for his father, who's the head coach at Middle Tennessee. Stockstill finally staying healthy for a year, which good for him. I hope he's a 5th or 6th round pick or something. But man, that's a really interesting angle there. Playing your last game with your dad as your head coach.
Yeah, that was the first thing I put in my notes, is that Middle Tennessee, motivation-wise, should be really amped up for this game. Stockstill's last game. And if you pay attention, too, to how Middle Tennessee State reacted to losing that game against UAB, you can watch the press conference. Both of the Stockstills were pretty upset about losing that game, and especially Rick. This is a spot where I think he really wants this team to go out with a win in Brent's last game. I think that the team around them certainly respects both their coach and the quarterback that leads them. I really think that this is a good spot motivationally for Middle Tennessee State. And motivation is so important that I have to like Middle Tennessee State in this game. App State without their head coach, also without their star running back, Jalen Moore. Middle Tennessee State played a slightly tougher schedule here as well. The one thing that bothers me a little bit about this game, App State's secondary is so good. They are very, very good in the secondary. They allowed the 3rd fewest passing yards of any team in the country this year. Middle Tennessee State can't run the ball very much at all. They have to be able to throw it. I maybe lean to the under a little bit here, but the fast track, I'm not sure how much I like an under. It's not a very high number in this venue. But, plus the points, as much as we're getting here, even with the fact that you're going against a really good secondary, I like Middle Tennessee State here.
I like Middle Tennessee in this game, too. You have this emotional angle that's definitely going to be played up, and it should be. It's an important angle. It's something that doesn't really happen a whole lot in college football. So I'm hoping for, a good showing here for Middle Tennessee. Also, I really love Middle Tennessee's coordinators. I think Scott Schaefer's a fantastic defensive coordinator. I think they'll have a good game plan. I also think that Tony Franklin is a very smart offensive mind. He'll have a good game plan here as well. And for Appalachian State, you know that the interim's not getting the job. And it's always such an interesting dynamic when you've got an interim who has a chance at the job versus an interim that doesn't. And I just don't know how excited Appalachian State is here for this game. They already have 10 wins. They won the inaugural Sun Belt Conference Championship game. I think they've kind of gotten everything that they want. Maybe 11 wins is great or whatever, but I think they've kind of already checked off all of their boxes. I don't think that's the case for Middle Tennessee here. I do like the Blue Raiders in this one, and this is a game that I haven't played yet. I know there's some 7s out there at flat juice still. This will be one I play because I do think this number probably ends up coming down.
Yeah, I think this number will come down as well. I think that the sharp money will likely take Middle Tennessee State in this game. What is the public going to do in this game? I'm not sure what the public's going to do in this game. I do think the Sharps will want to take the full touchdown. I think that this will be 6.5 across the board relatively soon.
All right, so let's spend a few minutes here on college basketball. I don't want to run too long with today's show, but I did promise college hoops, so I want to make sure that we do that a little bit here. Let's hit on the regression teams. I think that's something that we should definitely do here, and then we'll look at the couple games that you mentioned. You've got a couple of teams here you're looking at for some negative regression. And again, it is finals week in college basketball. Not a whole lot going on. Very weak slate during the week. Saturday's got some big-time matchups. Gonzaga, North Carolina being one of them. But very light week this week here in college basketball. So not a bad week if you're a little bit slow to college hoops to dig in a little bit and get some more information out there. But what about a couple of these negative regression teams, Kyle?
So first up, Indiana State, their three-point percentage so far this year, 48.8%. And we're pretty far into the season to have a 48.8% three-point percentage, especially when you consider how they've shot the ball from three the last couple of years, 33.9%, 35.8% the last 2 years. This three-point percentage is going down. I know that to be the case. What that means to them, ATS, not exactly sure. Indiana State is a team that's pretty good on defense, but they're not going to keep hitting this many three-pointers. So I think that's a good one to isolate there. I'll say the other negative regression one here real quick as well is Texas Tech, their field goal percentage defense, 33.3% allowed. Listen, Chris Beard is a tremendous coach, very, very good coach, and they play good defense. But I think if you look at the specifics of why they're at 33.3% allowed field goal percentage defense so far this year, 3 neutral site games so far this year, lower shooting numbers in games like that, and they've really faced some poor offenses. They have a really good defense, but they're not going to keep this up. I think the question for Texas Tech is going to be, can their offense do enough against the elite offenses to keep up? Texas Tech is going to play some teams that can score points. There's some pretty good offenses in their league as they go forward. Are they going to be good enough on offense to keep up? Well, nobody's going to have a 33.3% field goal percentage allowed for the course of the season. So I think that's something important to keep in mind for Texas Tech here going forward.
So what do you do with Texas Tech in that regard? I mean, is it just simpler to go ahead and maybe play some overs with them, or are you looking to fade them against the spread as well?
Yeah, I think that the first thing I'd like to go against them if they're a big favorite, because I think that they'll have some closer games. I don't like fading Chris Beard very much, to be honest with you. I think he's one of the best coaches in the country. But Texas Tech is not going to keep winning games by a large margin based on giving up 33% field goal percentage. They're going to have to be better on offense, or they're not going to win by margins consistently. I would lean toward the over in their game, certainly, especially when they're playing a team who has proven that they're efficient on offense. They haven't played very many of those so far this year, so I'll look for spots like that.
Well, then as a follow-up question, you mentioned offensive efficiency. Does that matter more to you than, say, just maybe a volume-based approach to where if they're playing a team that plays at a higher pace or a higher tempo, there is regression coming in this number, as you mentioned. So the more chances we have at regression coming may be more of a positive, or are you looking at the efficiency thing?
Well, I think both are good ways to look at it, to be totally honest. I mean, if they're playing against a team that plays really quickly, certainly there should be some more possessions in the game. I will say Texas Tech is good at controlling the tempo of the game, and they're not going to want to run as fast as some of these other teams. So that's why I would lean toward the efficiency metrics as far as the opposing offense, because I know that Texas Tech is going to play the way they want to play. They're not going to get into a track meet. So that's the stronger angle of the two, in my opinion.
All right, so we do have a team in line for some positive regression here. This is one of the major conference teams as well. We went a little under the radar to the Mo Valley with Indiana, then Texas Tech. Who are you looking at for some positive regression?
So Mississippi State, they've been really good so far this year. I was looking at Mississippi State in depth here a couple days ago, and it made me think about this one. Their free throws attempted this year are very, very low. If you take free throw attempted versus field goal attempted, it's a ratio that it's on KenPom.com. So if you have KenPom, you can look at this easily. 22.3% so far this year. They've been around 32% the last few years. This is a team that shoots quite a few three-pointers, so they're not going to have a really high free throw attempted rate. But they're going to get to the line more than they have so far this year. I think Mississippi State's one of those teams that was a little bit under the radar in past years, not too far under the radar as far as being a good team this year. I think everybody knows they're going to be good, but I still think Mississippi State could be a little bit better than some people realize. They have a good coach. They play good defense. As long as they're decent on offense, Mississippi State's going to be a good team this year.
So I got to say, man, we're going to talk about a couple of games that are coming up here this week, but there's, 5 lined games tonight? This is the closest you get to a day off, right?
Yeah, I'm passing on today's college basketball schedule. Did play one NBA game, but pretty easy to not take too long on the college basketball. Certainly, it's nice to have a little bit of a respite after you have a Saturday slate of games that takes forever to go through.
All right, so let's touch on one of the games you want to talk about here. We got 2 of them, and that's how we'll wrap up this segment. LSU and Houston. This one gets an ESPN2 billing on Wednesday night. Again, not a whole lot of games this week, but this certainly appears to be one of the better ones of the slate. 9 o'clock tip-off down in the Lone Star State. What's intriguing about this game for you, Kyle?
Well, first of all, I thought that, it's been really impressive how well Houston's played so far this year. I think Kelvin Sampson deserves quite a bit of credit for how this program has done. They lose Rob Gray after last year, and I assumed that they'd be down a decent amount. Here they are 8-0. I know they haven't played a really tough schedule, but they won at BYU, certainly a tough place to win. They won at Oklahoma State, and they won a home game against Oregon. So they have 3 nice wins so far this year. Other than that, they've played some really weak teams. But Houston deserves credit. They're a very good defensive team, and they're also slowing the tempo down very consistently. They're 351st out of 353 in tempo. I think that's important for a game like this because you've got an LSU team that is somewhere in the middle when it comes to tempo, but LSU's offense, very efficient. LSU not very good on defense. If you look at their numbers from last year, they didn't play that fast. They had some really high-scoring games because they were so efficient on offense and so weak on defense. LSU is a team that is going to be good on offense again this year. I think they're going to be subpar on defense again this year. I see Houston as the better rounded team. Houston's going to be favored here by 6.5 points, something like that. I think I would lean toward the under here if I was going to take anything. You're going to see a total in the mid to upper 130s. And you got a Houston team that's been consistently showing that they can slow the game down. They can play really good defense. So I think it's the better defense than what LSU has been playing so far this year.
Now, for LSU, they played 3 neutral site games in Orlando. They played Charleston, Florida State, which was probably more like a road game given the spot, and then Oklahoma State. But this is their first true road game of the season. They'll play St. Mary's on a neutral here on Saturday, but first true road game of the year. What does that matter to you at all? Because, they have played somewhere other than home, just not in, any kind of true road venue.
Yeah, it does, and I'm glad you brought that up, especially because this is not an experienced team. They're 331st out of 353 in experience, so I think bringing up that this is their first true road game is very important. You could question whether Houston's going to have a tremendous home court advantage with the fan base. It's finals week. I don't know how many of the students will still be there versus ones that won't or ones that would show up to the game or not, and that's something that we'll talk about going forward. Probably next week would be a good time to talk about something like that, how the home court advantage goes down quite a bit. But, Houston is certainly in the better spot in this game. If I was going to take a side, I would take Houston here. You got to lay a decent number because Houston's played so well this year, and that would be my concern is that Houston's not going to be undervalued here, so you have to just be fading LSU.
All right, let's talk about a premier program against something of an up-and-comer, Texas and Grand Canyon. You've got a Texas team here, 6-3 on the year, lost to Michigan State. Okay, that's fine. It happens. No big deal. Lost to Radford. Okay, maybe that's a problem. And then losing to Shaka Smart's old employer, VCU, last Wednesday before beating Purdue. So Texas all over the map here this season. They got Grand Canyon coming up on Saturday.
Yeah, to me, this is a good spot to take Grand Canyon. You're going to be getting points. I mean, I would hope that I'd be able to get something like 11 or 11.5 points in a game like this. Maybe the fact that Texas hasn't played that well lately would make this one be 9.5 or 10. I would want double digits here in a game like this, but Grand Canyon's got to be up for a game like this. I mean, Dan Marley's team, they're a good team. I mean, they're not a great team, certainly, but they've had some close games against good opponents. They only lost by 5 to South Dakota State on the road. They just lost by 8 to Nevada in their last game. They beat Boise State at home. If you look at the past couple of years, too, Grand Canyon's played up to good opponents pretty well. A couple of years ago, played a really close game against Penn State, nearly knocked off Louisville at home a couple of years ago. And then last year they had some close games. They lost in double overtime at Boise State, played respectably at Louisville, lost a really close game to Illinois. This is a Grand Canyon team that's pretty solid, and I think they'd be the much more motivated team in a game like this. You know, Texas just had a win off this past weekend on Sunday, actually, against Purdue, 72-68. So they kind of bounced back from their disappointing stretch. And then they play after that. After this game, they would play Providence, and then pretty soon they're going to be getting into Big 12 play. I think it would be easy for them to overlook a team like Grand Canyon, and they've been so inconsistent as Texas that if you can get a decent amount of points with the team that you think will be highly motivated and is a decent team, I have to look toward Grand Canyon. And I will say before I finish, one of the things I love about doing this show is that we can talk about Grand Canyon and Texas. You know, a lot of people don't want to talk about games like this. They're going to talk about North Carolina and Gonzaga only. I love the fact that Adam likes talking about games like this, and I think it's very helpful for listeners.
I mean, hey, you're looking at the Grand Canyon team here. They have 4 losses, but all 4 losses are games they probably should lose, given that they were just transitioning up not too long ago, and all of them are by less than 10 points. I mean, this is a team that could be a little bit of a moneymaker in their line games. Now, of course, when they get into WAC play, you're going to have to dig a little bit harder to find some, but they have played really well, and Texas is a team that hasn't played well in some of its games. So I think it's a perfect type of angle to look at, and the kind of game I do want to talk about here on the show, because let's be honest, there's no value in a betting line for Gonzaga versus North Carolina. It's going to be one of the sharpest lines on the board on Saturday.
Absolutely, and I think that, that's the important distinction from Bang the Book Radio versus the average show that you're going to be listening to, is everybody's going to talk about Gonzaga and North Carolina. There's not a big edge to digging deeper is really better for the average bettor.
Kyle Hunter, professional handicapper over at huntersportspicks.com. What do you got going on over there right now, man?
A couple special offers here for this week. College basketball season pass, $599 for every pick from now through the title game. If you want totals only, $499. Mention Bang the Book Radio and contact me, Kyle at huntersportspicks.com or at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter. And then the All Bowl season pass, $250. You get all the plays as soon as I make them. If you want to add in NFL plays to the Super Bowl as well, I'll make that $375 total for the football package. And again, mention Bang the Book Radio in that special if you're interested.
Yeah, so definitely reach out to Kyle at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter or Kyle at huntersportspicks.com. Definitely the best way to get through to him, the quickest way to get through to him as well. So certainly encourage all of our listeners to check that out if that's something that you're interested in. Kyle Hunter, huntersportspicks.com, at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter. Appreciate the time, sir. Thank you for hanging in here, sticking it out. Sorry for running a little bit long. We'll talk to you again next week.
Hey, I enjoyed it as always. Take care, man.